Hello, YouTube. So did I just make a video going over the changes to the patch notes according to TLIDB? So for those of you who are not aware, TLIDB is a fan-made site that uses the data of the game to essentially, give us information on every ability in the game. And it tends to be a lot more in detail, a lot more in depth than what you would find on the patch notes. So the TLIDB does not get updated at the same time as the patch notes. And for the Afterlife season, it actually happened to get updated a few hours ago. So I spent some time just going through TLIDB, trying to look at as many possible changes as I humanly could find, as well as things that other people have managed to find. And I've gone ahead and I've compiled a list of changes that are now different from the patch notes. So either things that got changed that wasn't listed on the patch notes, or things that got listed on the patch notes and are now no longer accurate or up to date. So first up is gonna be Selena 2. So in the patch notes, Selena 2 stands for the D per base trade, has 20% Terra skill area, and 20% additional Terra skill damage. That is no longer the case. She lost the 20% skill area and the 20% additional damage. And her Dreambreaker's Gyre, which is the red tornado that she has, lost about 15% additional damage at every level. So with a red Gyre memory, instead of having 70% additional damage, it's only going to do 55% additional damage. And then lastly, Lonely Ensemble got completely changed. So prior Lonely Ensemble, at level 1, you could have 2 dancers around you that had minus 60% additional damage. And once you had a red Gyre memory, you would have 3 dancers with 3 spell bursts that each deal 50% of your damage. They did change this now, that you need a lot more investment to actually get the full value out of the skill. Now, starting at level 1 and level 2 of the trait, you only have 1 dancer, but the damage reduction is still the same. And if you want to get the 3rd dancer, you do need to have a +2 Euro memory. And if you do invest into the +2 Euro memory, instead of the dancers dealing minus 30% additional damage, they're instead going to do minus 40% additional damage. So they're only going to do 60% of your total damage, not 70%. And then the last change is quite interesting. So Crimson Dance, when I was in my initial reaction to the season, I said this is a very, very bad trade. It's very terrible. They have made it quite a bit better, or more usable now. Crimson Dance, the interval goes down as you level up the skill instead of it always being an interval of 5, and they added 1 second duration to each dance step. But to compensate for buffing each of the dance steps, they did nerf each step. So Agonizing Revival now only regens 30% of your max life per second instead of 20%. Crimson Dash only gives 33% movement speed instead of 50%. And the additional damage from putting an enemy to sleep is now only 66% instead of 100%. I think it's now much more realistic if you have a level 5 Crimson Endless Dance to actually get full uptime on each dance step. Because the amount of duration of the skill is not that much anymore to actually have full uptime, but the effects themselves are a lot worse. And then it's also just a question, I still think this trade's pretty bad because it's a lot of investment for not that much gain. But I can definitely see a universe where maybe some life stackable or something really wants a 30% regain. I just think there's better ways to get life restoration in this game than using an Endless Dance. But that goes through all the changes to Sinnoh 2. I checked through a bunch of other heroes, and I didn't see any changes to any other heroes. I think Sinnoh 2 is the only one who got nerfed. But it does make sense that she got nerfed. Her traits were absolutely absurd before, way too good. And even with the nerfs, they still seem very, very strong. I think she's still going to be an extremely strong hero. I think this is just trying to put her a bit more in line with other heroes. So we have quite a few skill changes, or just clarifications. So Chromatic Shot obviously did get nerfed in the patch notes. They didn't list the effectiveness of Chromatic Shot though. The effectiveness is also nerfed. It went from 157% down to 131%. And the skill still has the Int, Dex, and Strength tag. So despite all the nerfs to Chromatic Shot, it having all 3 3 attribute tags at least is a very big boon, because it does mean that the skill triple dips when you have all stats. And this means I can finally go ahead and make my Sage starter guide, so you can look forward to that. I will be working on that shortly. Now, Iceland's received a very big buff. We already knew from the patch notes that the flat damage got buffed by 29%, but on top of the flat damage getting buffed, the effectiveness of Iceland's also got buffed by 29%, going from 177% to 229%. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I think Iceland's might just get played by a ton of people. This skill seems really good. So in the past, what people have done on Iceland's, if they've done the Iceland's Rebound and Iceland's Bounce supports on Kirino 2, where Kirino 2's trait allowed them to scale multiple projectiles, and then they would scale a bunch of bounces, and that way you could overcome one of the skill's biggest weaknesses, which is the fact that you can't actually multi-proj with it. Multi-projectiles from Iceland's cannot hit the same enemy more than once. That trait did get changed on Kirino 2. You can no longer... That trait now specifically states that you can't multi-proj with it anymore. Or, like, you can't hit the same enemy multiple times the same projectile. But this is still probably going to be a pretty decent setup. Just instead of scaling projectile quant in a skill, you're going to be scaling jump quant. Or I think another setup that seems very interesting that you can do is the other 2 supports for Iceland's, which lets you spec into Terra Frost. So the one support just gives you like 50% additional damage if you hit an enemy that's inside a Frost Terra, and the other one actually spawns a Frost Terra whenever you hit enemies. Those 2 work very well together, but a build that I saw Minmax doing, like Trader doing, that seemed very interesting, is instead of having the support that spawns a Frost Terra, he just does a 6-link Iceland setup with a 6-link Frost Terra setup. And he just plays both Terra plus Icelands. I'm not entirely sure how good that's going to be, especially considering that, you know, it's going to be hard speccing into Terras and Icelands at the same time. But I think the build looks overall very strong. I do imagine that no matter like how you end up playing it, like Iceland's G2 is going to be pretty... It's probably going to be the strongest like spellcaster next season outside of Sinnoh 2. It's definitely going to be an S tier build in my opinion. And these Iceland's buffs are just absurd. The skill's actually quite nice to play with. It's a very nice tangle skill in my opinion. Now, I cannot explain this one. I think I just... Maybe I PayPal like Andre like $50 or something. Like, I have no idea what happened here. But Iroh Einaryor's effectiveness got buffed from 135% to 185%. Who asked for this? Iroh Einaryor did not need a buff. This is a massive change. This is such a gigantic buff to the skill. I'm completely flabbergasted by it. Now, in the patch notes, Ghostblade Einaryor was, well, really strange. So, in the patch notes, Ghostblade states this. Venom base damage was reduced from 167% down to 93%. If you actually look at the Ghostblade skill as it is currently in the game, it nowhere here it states 167%. It had 144% effectiveness of damage, which is what this is referring to, but it never had 167%. So this is like just makes no sense at all. And then the explosion aspect of Ghostblade got nerfed from 216% down to 185%. Now what it actually is the effectiveness, or the weapon scaling, has remained the same at 144%, and the explosion got reduced from 216% scaling down to 93% scaling, which is honestly one of the biggest nerfs I've ever seen, like just straight up. That is just crazy to think about. And on top of that, this is going to be a running theme you're going to see throughout the video. All dot-based builds and things did receive just a universal nerf in the patch notes. And the first of that I'm going to be listing is going to be Mind Control. So Mind Control's persistent damage got nerfed from 675 erosion persistent damage down to 519 damage. And its effectiveness also got reduced from 125 down to 96. I'm not entirely sure why the effectiveness got changed, because at least as far as I'm aware, you know, this doesn't really do anything on a dot build. You don't scale the weapon effectiveness, it doesn't do anything. But that's irrelevant. The persistent damage did receive a nerf. And there's quite a few skills in the patch notes that received like pretty big buffs, you know? From the side of things. Like, Wilting Beam received this massive buff to its erosion damage. Frost Terror received this massive damage buff to its Terra aspect. Shadow Swamp received this massive buff to its Terra aspect. All of these skills did not get buffed, instead they got nerfed for some reason. So the first up is going to be Wilting Beam. The base damage, instead of it being buffed from 120 to 127, 1,275%, it's now only 981 base erosion persistent damage, which is still a buff. Even though this looks like a nerf, it is still a buff because it was a 956 before. But it's very just strange, I guess, that it got buffed so little compared to what it was in the patch notes. Path of Flames is another one. In the patch notes, Path of Flames got buffed to 1,212 persistent fire damage. Now instead it's only buffed to 932, and it was 909 before. I'm just very confused by these teeny tiny amount of buffs. It's like, oh, 25 extra damage, what is this? 23 extra damage. It's just weird, to be honest with you. And then Icebound Beam did receive some buffs, which I'm not sure why this got buffed. It's not mentioned in the patch notes at all. It's not in the patch notes, but Icebound Beam received a massive buff, just like Iron Yor. The cold damage, or the channeling damage one, did get increased. And once you reach max channel stacks, your flat damage also got increased from 770 max to 928 max. And the effectiveness of added damage receives an 8% buff. Or an 8% increase, which is what? A 20% buff. Pretty damn substantial. Really nice change for Icebound Beam. Switch to version. So in the patch notes, they changed the version to make it that the projectile quant got reduced from 5 down to 2. But the additional damage you gain from it got buffed to 26%. They just reverted that. You're just back to the 15 to 18%. I don't know why, but that's what they decided to do. Thundercloud received a very big buff on its effectiveness. It is mentioned in the patch notes that Thundercloud received a buff, but on top of the base damage getting increased, it also had its effectiveness increased, which is pretty nice. Pretty much any skill here that has its base, flat amount increased had its effectiveness increased by roughly the same percentage. But the fact that the effectiveness is never listed in the skill adjustments is very frustrating, because it does change how the skill scales. It does change how you play around the skill, and I think it's very important information to have in the game, or on the patch notes. This one, I genuinely can't explain either. So in the patch notes, Psychic Burst got reduced at level 20 from 45% down to 35%. They decided that's not good enough, so they added 0.5% to it. I don't know why. But level 20 Psychic Burst has 35.5% additional damage instead of 35%. Cool. And now we have a long list of Terra changes. So Frost Terra got changed from 629 cold flat damage to 484, which that sounds like a massive nerf, but before this patch it was only 494. So again, just another weird change where its flat damage got reduced by 10 for some reason. Haunting Abomination I absolutely cannot understand. Its erosion persistent damage got reduced from 405 down to 399. And lost 1% effectiveness, which the effectiveness for Haunting Bomb actually does make sense because it does have a hit aspect of the skill. But I'm pretty sure, this is just weird. These number changes are just so strange. Why are we using 10 here? Why are we using 6 here? But that's beyond the point. Flame Jet got reduced from 485 on the Terra aspect down to 373. I probably should explain this. When I say the Terra aspect, what I mean is the big circle damage. So Terras tend to have multiple parts to the skill. Once you put the skill down, that circle is the Terra aspect, which does ticking damage. And then on top of that, you'll have various special effects maybe happening within the Terra, such as Flame Jet that spews out the eruptions. But those numbers are not affected. It's just the circle's damage that's affected. Now Shadow Swamp got a very slight nerf, but also compared to what we were promised, a massive nerf. Its effectiveness went down from 78 down to 74. Again, effectiveness on dot skills doesn't really matter. Its explosion damage, however... So explosion damage is not the Terra aspect of the skill. This is the effect of Psychic Burst. Of Shadow Swarm. Which is... Cast the skill and generates an erosion explosion at the area. And then this explosion leaves behind the swamp. So this initial explosion got nerfed from 720 down to 401. But it was 420 before, so it's like a 19 base damage nerf. And then the Terra aspect of the skill got nerfed by 9. Your persistent erosion damage got nerfed by 9. I don't know why. Again, it's just strange. But yeah. Now, Stormfield itself is very much unchanged. However, they did clarify something. Stormfield Conduction has a interesting line on it. So if you actually look at the Stormfield skill, it has this line on it where it says, for every enemy you've hit, like every time your current hits an enemy, it increases the damage of your currents by 3%, up to a max of 8. At least I believe it's a max of 8. Yeah, it says here max of 8. So this gives it up to 24% additional. And if you look at the current conduction support, it's very unclear in the patch notes, but it says your current generated by the support skill now deals 6.5 to 7% additional damage for each enemy hit. It was very unclear if this stacks with this 3% additional. You know, if these are like combining with each other, multiplying with each other, or however it works. It is now made clear on Stormfield Conduction's wording that it changes the skill. So instead of the skill giving you 3% additional damage per target hit, it now instead gives 7% on a max roll. And then Stormfield Thunderclap got updated its wording as well. It now specifies on Thunderclap that the Spellburst aspect only works for hit damage. So you cannot play like a Stormfield dot bolt, you have to play it hit based if you want to use the Thunderclap support. And in general, I think Stormfield is just meant to be hit based. It doesn't really look like you're supposed to play a dot. And it doesn't make that much sense as a dot build. Nethergrass had no patch notes, but we now know that it has 562 persistent erosion damage. And the Extermination, which was very weird. In the patch notes, Extermination didn't really like tell you anything about it. It now specifies that Nethergrass Extermination grants the skill 25 to 29% additional damage, and it makes the enemies in the middle of the turret take an extra 20% damage. Now, this is part of the skill, that enemies in the middle of Nethergrass take additional damage, and this is just adding an extra 20% to that, which is actually very substantial and very good. Fallen Star also had no patch notes, but we now know it deals 332 to 616 spell fist damage with an 88% effectiveness. But the special canvas support for Fallen Star, the special canvas support Starfall, which was like the big meteor you saw, had its damage reduced from 220% down to 150%. Now, Tidewell pretty much just got buffed as far as I'm aware. Tidewell now also, on top of everything else that does in the patch notes, deals an additional 5% damage per stack of slow on the enemies. This is not like mentioned anywhere in the patch notes, but it kind of makes sense with the skill. Because if you actually look at the patch notes, the skill has a slow built into it. And now that slow is also scaling its damage. I think slow caps out at 5 stacks, so this can go up to 25% additional damage, which that is pretty damn nice. That is a big numeric buff to Tidewell. Now, Thornfield probably received the biggest nerf out of all the persistent skills we've seen so far. But the nerf is a bit deceptive. So the Terra aspect of Thornfield's damage got reduced from 902 persistent physical damage down to 486. But Thornfield has a second aspect to the skill, which gives a damage buff for every 100 max life that you have. And before this gave you 1% additional damage up to 40% additional. Now it gives 1.25% additional up to 100% additional. So the total nerf to this skill is basically you went from 1,262%, 1,200 1,262.8 fizz dot damage, down to 972 fizz dot damage. Then there's been some changes to the new legendary items that were added. The only ones that got changed are 3 Saints and Beneath the Sticks. 3 Saints did have its damage multi buffed, so instead of having a 33% more multi per like spell level, it is now a 36% more multi. But the amount of levels you get from the item itself did get reduced. So before it had this effective versus ally res per level, 21 to 30. Let me just show this go in case people don't know what I'm talking about. So it had this line: for every 21 to 30% effective ally res, gain 1 corresponding elemental skill level. This got nerfed. So before, if you had a 21 or 22% roll, and you had 90 max res, you could get +4 to each element. Now it rolls from 30 to 36, which means that if you have a perfect 30 roll and you have 90 max res, you can only get +3 per skill level, instead of the big, +4 to each skill level. Which, I'm going to be honest with you, this buff to Mantra of Saints, making this aspect, instead of 33% additional, it's now 36% additional, is significantly bigger than this is a nerf. So overall, I would say 3 Saints did get buffed. All the second engines can drop in front? Yes, the patch notes are wrong. I'll get to that. Now, Beneath the Sticks only needs 3 to 4 excess minutes channel stacks to get a immunity line. So Beneath the Sticks has this line, which is very confusing in the patch notes, that basically if you have 5 to 8 min channel stacks, if you have 5 to 8 more min channel stacks than you have like max channel stacks, or max channel in general, which is baseline 5 for most skills, then you get immune to Trauma, Ignite, and Wilt. That got changed to only needing 3 to 4 excess min channel stacks now, which is pretty nice. Then Backspirits. Squirtle did receive a buff to compensate for the new nerfs to spell bursts. Instead of needing 6 spell bursts to activate Squirtle, you now only need 4 spell bursts to activate Squirtle, which is actually a very, very big buff to Squirtle, because it now makes it much more reasonable for builds that aren't Bing 2 to actually use and utilize the Squirtle Pack Spirit. Like, I think it's very realistic to see Selena players, for example, using Squirtle now. And there's other builds like Yoko 1, for example, can you also use Squirtle now. Whereas before, getting to 6 spell bursts was just very, very difficult.
Meow, meow, meow.
Overall, every dot skill did get nerfed. And the biggest way we saw this was through changes to crafting. So for both two-handers and one-handers, the base ailment values that you could craft did get nerfed. I'm just going to use Scepters because that's what most people play when they play dot builds, which is the one-handed values. Ignite's base damage went from 350 to 650, down to 245 to 455. Trauma's base damage got reduced from 480 to 1120, down to 335 to 785. And then Volt received a slight nerf and lost his funny number from 56 to 67, down to 40 to 45. Now, something that's a bit confusing in the patch notes is if you actually look at the patch notes, you'll often see lines like Abyssal difficulty and Deep difficulty. If you were to change this to, the, Chinese patch notes, you would see the kanji used for Deep and the kanji used for Abyssal are the exact same. So these two words are the exact same words. It's not like two different difficulty types. And both of these are referring to Profound. It is just some very strange, translation error with, I guess, the fucking AI translations they use. So you don't have to worry about, your compasses are dropping from deep space or your uniques are dropping from deep space. We are, 99% confident that all of these are just Profound Plus. So a lot of these items got nerfed to, instead of them dropping from rank 8, you're just going to see them in Profound, which is not a big deal because everyone who plays Rosa 2 reaches Profound in 10 hours either way of gameplay. Now, I did want to also mention some changes to the Atlas trees. I did want to mention some Atlas changes, or I should say Profound Star Netherrealm Talents, whatever the fuck it's called. So there were some really interesting changes in my mind. Creation Engine received some changes, and a very notable change to Creation Engine is you now have access to this node that in NetherRealm Sages, when you activate a gold card, you're guaranteed one gameplay exclusive. So one Creation Engine card is guaranteed every single map when you run Creation Engine. Because you're guaranteed to spawn a golden card every map. Oh wait, no, sorry, it's not guaranteed. Someone said it's guaranteed. Okay, never mind. I apologize about that misinformation. This is not a guaranteed node. I must have misunderstood what someone else meant. But this is a pretty nice change to Creation Engine. The changes overall are very confusing to me. So you now can spec into either having more cards, more gear, or more compasses. But the entire tree has like all sorts of nodes specifying cards. And it seems like this is supposed to be a card farm. So I don't really know when exactly like you would go compasses or gear instead, because once you do that, like all of these card nodes you're taking just become useless, but you still want to go into them because they give you additional quant. So it's very strange because of that, in my mind. But overall, I do like the changes to Creation Engine. I do think this is going to help a lot with getting like dues early on, and hopefully making it that we don't have another Scorpion the Surge situation where it's like a 10k FE duo. The Lunaria talent tree has been added to the game now. And just a warning before you go into the game and, just take every fucking option you see here. This is not a tree where you can take every option. A lot of these parts of this tree do contradict each other. And it's specifically meant to encourage a certain type of playstyle. If you go down here into these nodes, you are gonna make it that the caskets that spawn, so whenever you like had a reward casket spawn from the Lunaria gameplay, will no longer drop anything. If you instead go up here into this branch, you now are not going to be getting a bonus from combos unless you had a rainbow combo. But when you do hit rainbow combos, you're always going to spawn a casket. And this is going to be a good way to like farm caskets, essentially. Other than that, there's just some generic good nodes in this tree. I'm actually I like what they did with Lunaria talent tree. It's not like just take every option. I like how they're allowing you to try different playstyles out for whatever fits you. And I think that's doing a good job following like the precedent that was set behind in the Lunaria season, where the whole concept of the mechanic is you can choose the way you want to farm it, which I think is really cool. With all that being said though, you're most likely going to try and take as many nodes in the tree as possible, because you do want to take as many of these 1% additional drop quant nodes as possible. Just be careful when you do take these nodes that you don't take something that bricks another node. Or if you're not going to go for rainbows, do not take these top lands, because the quant you lost, the amount of quant you're going to lose by not having like anything from combos anymore is quite massive. This is very much a risk and reward type thing, where it really rewards you for going for those rainbows. And then lastly, we have the hunting changes. The hunting changes are also very interesting. So the hunting changes gives you one of two options when it goes in gameplay. You can either go this bottom side of the map, where you're trying to replicate your final boss, and then you're just having your bosses spawn plain water chests, you're having them spawn traveler chests, just generic god chests spawning chests, as well as just having like the super end boss. And this is pretty much like what you would expect right now from the game when you play hunting. It's very similar to like the current state of hunting. But if you instead decide to go to the top side of hunting tree, I'm going to warn you already. This node right here, Insidious Hunting, does have this line. Gods of Hunting cannot replicate bosses. Every single node down here is about replicating the boss. I am 99% confident this node completely bricks the bottom and bottom right side of the tree completely. They are intending you to either play bottom and bottom right, as well as like the first 4 nodes here. Or I guess first 7 nodes, because you want the drop quant. You're either going to play like first 7 here, bottom right, or you're not going to touch the bottom and bottom right at all, and you're going to take every node at the top here. if you do take all the notes at the top here, it is going to change how the hunting mechanic works entirely. It is instead going to become Goddess of Hunting Safari. If you watch the reveal trailer, you probably saw that in the hunting preview, they, at the start of the boss, like at the start of the map, they have the hunting there. So you activate the hunting at the start of the map, and then throughout the map, there's like there's like various bosses spawn throughout the map. This is that node basically. This makes it that your entire map just gets turned into a bunch of bosses, and every time you kill a boss, it buffs the next boss, and you have all sorts of like additional drop quant for when you buff the bosses, and you can make them harder. If you want to do hunting in like a very lazy way, as you've been doing it so far, where you just like throw it into another strat, you can take these bottom nodes and do hunting the same as you've done it before. If you want to invest a bit more into hunting and make your map significantly harder, you can instead go to top nodes.
Meow, meow, meow.
I think it's a very, very cool change. I'm actually looking forward to like testing a round of hunting. I think a lot of people are going to enjoy hunting. I think this is a net positive to the game, and it's also a melee attack buff. So yeah, melee will just keep winning. I hate it. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. That's all the changes I could find from TLIDB that wasn't listed in the patch notes, or different from the patch notes. There might be here or there some like minor things. I tried to be pretty like, you know, I tried to like go through every single thing listed in the patch notes itself, but some stuff just is not listed in the patch notes at all. Like the Arrow Ironyor or Icebound Beam buffs just weren't mentioned anywhere. So it is possible that I could have missed something because TLIDB did go up today. Very often when you're like trying to like look at multiple tabs at once, the site just like crashes you or like just doesn't load for you because there's so many people that are currently going through the site. Anyway, I hope this video was informational. I hope this video, you know, maybe helped you choose your sorter. I don't know if it's going to. And I hope you all had a lovely time watching. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day further. And I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye, YouTube. Bye-bye.